In the beginning, it was like always a big mixture of air and particles, but Father Sky and Mother Earth separated, leaving a gap between the two. So there was always a very longing and a missing of that love and that connection. So that's when man was born, because the body and spirit from Father Sky and the body from Mother Earth came together to form that man. So there was never like a passing away, like it was maybe the death of the body would go back into the Mother Earth, but the spirit would go back to Father Sky. So there was always that connection. So it was a different way of looking at things, the way we look at it, or a lot of people look at it today. And it's an old teaching that was taken away, especially during the residential school. That was a big part of that whole breakdown of First Nations. It was complete destruction of that spiritual part of their life that was completely erased, because it was sinful for them not to have lived the way that they were supposed to be living back in them, because of the way the religion had brought in the residential schools and the way it was taught. If you weren't taught that, if you didn't live that way, you virtually went to hell, right? So it was, it's a very easy thing for people to say, even today, I'd say, kind of get over it, but it was a thing that was taught and crammed into First Nations people back then that made you almost hate yourself. And that was being passed. It might have happened 100 years ago or 150 years ago, but today it's still happening from day to day to day. It's not, things haven't changed because they were taught how to do it to their own kids, their own family. So it was never, it was just an ongoing thing that was pumped into them. It was, it was devastating. So it's like I say, it's not a thing that you can just say, oh well, get over it. You can't. It's still happening. Can't get over something that's ongoing. So it's the understanding of the culture coming back, the language coming back, but the one biggest thing of all is the spiritual. A lot of that is not being like, it's a spiritual mixed up with religion that has been hammered into them, since the beginning. So that's been a big thing in my thinking and my going through life right now is that understanding of like, how can you get that spiritual back into the way it should be? And I don't think it's a matter of anybody trying to make one thing happen or another. I just think that it's something that is going to happen. That's why the carvings have always been, all the way through it, is talking about a rebirth, coming back to a time when things are back in tune. So to me, that's always been my understanding and the way of my love of the place is that hope and that, the love of that coming back to the full circle.
Do you feel we're coming back to balance or no?
We're coming very close to that now, and a lot of that is to do with all these different COVIDs and all these sort of things. I mean, it's happened way back then. It was the smallpox. Now we have a COVID, which is basically doing the same thing, creating a lot of death, a lot of destruction, breaking down making a big change in the world. I mean, it's to me, I think it's making money worth nothing. I mean, some ways it might think that big corporations and stuff are making bigger money, but it's when it really comes down to it, what are you going to do when you have all that money and nobody else has any? What is it worth? It's the spirituality and looking after Mother Earth is the most important thing to have, and because that's the material and the spiritual, everything's tied together. It's a very important thing.
Do you think balance is coming back to Bella Coola?
I believe balance has been coming back to Bella Coola in the last, ever since they started coming back with the language and the culture. I've seen it, just in my lifetime down there, which is probably 37 years. The balance is coming back because the language is being learnt, the culture is being learnt. Also looking at, I guess you'd call it the religious part, the prayers and stuff like that, but it's a matter of trying to separate and understand the true spiritual, and a lot of that's starting to come back when you see it actually even over all of the Turtle Island, which is the fight against oil and oil lines and all these sort of things, and saving the old forest. A lot of that is starting to understand that is the important thing, is saving Mother Earth, because Mother Earth is a big part of who we are. And if we're not a part of that, well, we're basically part of spiritual, which is there has to be a separation, and we have to bring the two together and keep the two together. Otherwise, there's nothing. After going through all the rebirth times of like the fire, the ice age, and the flood, residential school, smallpox, all those sort of things, and we're in now, it was about 1991 as slowly I uncovered this. And at that time it was pure white, something like inside the pool there. It was quite confusing at the time because being white, it was really hard to see the different diagrams on it. It'd be like looking at white paper with white ink. So I kind of kept looking at it and trying to figure out what it was through time. And I noticed that this looked like a goat, mountain goat. Because there's the nose, and then you have the two eyes, and then the two ears, and there's the horns. But it's different than all the other carvings. It actually sticks out. So it's definitely a different way of carving. This one over here, as I was telling you back there, when them people came in from the water, there was 7 families. And if you look at this one, the Maori, the New Zealand people, I realized that there's 2 ears here, and there's a crown on here, and there's 6 crowns, and then 1 dot in here. So it's like, again, it's that 7 families. So it was, over time, I kind of came to the connection of what it really meant. A few years after I had uncovered it, my wife and myself decided to go to New Zealand for a trip. And we just wanted to go as a holiday. But the thing that was kind of neat about it, our daughter, Lisa, met this lady. Her name was Anna Fryer. They had a second-hand store downtown. And she mentioned that we were going to go to New Zealand. She went, wow. She said, that's a good idea. She said, I'm from New Zealand. She said, and I'm going back there. She said, I'll see if I can make a connection for you. So she came out to the house and introduced herself. And probably a year or so later, she phoned up and said, well, I met this guy in New Zealand, and he'd be really good for you, help you out. So he phoned up, and I was talking to him for a while, and we kind of hit it off really well. And he said, oh yeah, he said, I can show you around to a few different places. And I think probably about 3 or 4 months later, he phoned up again, and he said, hey, if you could come over as a cultural group, I can take you all over the North Island to different maraes, and you can share your culture, and we'll share our culture. Well, it'd be like an exchange in a way. I thought, well, that would be a pretty good thing to do. So anyhow, I talked to Jeanette, and we talked about it, and we talked to Chris and Lance. They were just young then in school. They were probably 6 or 7. And so we thought, well, if we're going to go as a culture group, we're all going to have to learn the songs and the dances. And so we did. We started learning all these songs and dances. The boys, they put them on tape so we could listen to them back then, and started making paddles. I think it was 30 some odd paddles. We made drums, hand drums. They're all painted, same as the paddles, they were all painted. And the idea of doing that was we were going to use them for trade. As we went to one marae, we'd do the dance, do the the dance, and then would leave them with a paddle that we used for dancing, and we also leave them a drum. So that was kind of a neat way of doing it. And so finally the day came. Hey, we're going to New Zealand, and away we went. Of course, we walked into the airport with all this luggage, and it was just amazing, all these boxes and stuff. And they started going through it all, and next thing I knew, there was an Aboriginal guy, I guess, that looks after Aboriginal stuff, and he come running over and asked them guys, what were they doing? Is this is this a cultural thing? And we said yes, it was. And he said, put your stuff back in there and put your straps back on and come with me. So that was our inspection. We were on the plane and heading for New Zealand. So it was quite a neat thing. Now, when we ended up in New Zealand, there was a lot of stories told to me over there as we went from marae to marae. And when we first got off the plane, I always remember this old gentleman came and shook my hand, and he says, "Hey," he says, "I've been waiting for you to come for 7 years." And Chris, the son, he says, "Wow," he says, "remember," he says, "you uncovered that in 91. That was 7 years ago." I thought, well, I don't keep track of stuff like that, but I thought, well, he knows, so that was cool. And so anyhow, we ended up starting to go all to these different villages, and there was a husband and wife kept coming to these different maraes in the morning and talking with me and asked me to come to their marae, and I said, well, I can't make that decision. That has to be the organizers. So I thought, well, it wasn't until, I don't know, probably a week or week and a half later, they said, okay, we'll have a meeting with your organizers. And so that's what we did. And I sat in with him, and he says, well, I said, I don't know where this Nappy Marae is, but I said, do we even go by there? And he said, well, yeah, we do. And I said, well, can we just stop in there and sing a few songs and have a tea with them? And he said, would that make you happy? And they said, well, yeah, they were happy with that. They had a big smile on their face. And so anyhow, as time went on, we ended up at this one marae, and we put on a performance there. And the next morning we got up and got all our stuff on and our clothes, and off we went. We ended up in the Nappy yard. They had kind of a yard, and then they had this, I don't know, I guess kind of the kitchen. I don't know what they have a name for it, but it's where they do all the eating. And then they had the marae actually just started off to the left, and so it was all this framework up, and so we were still outside the gate because you have to be invited onto all these different maraes. So as we were getting ready, getting our regalia on and stuff, Diane, one of the head persons that was self-organized it all, she came and she said, hey, I got to leave. She said, my brother-in-law committed suicide. And I thought, oh, wow, that happens everywhere. And so we said, well, yeah, of course. She said, but we won't do it until we get invited onto this marae, and then we'll have to put you up in a motel if whatever happens. And I don't think it was 10 minutes later, and Rongo came over and kind of with the same news. He said, my wife and kids came to the show last night, and they said they were in an accident, and after they left at kind of the same time we did in the morning. Anyhow, they were in a car accident, but they didn't have cell phone where we were staying. So anyhow, when we got to this Nappy Marae, like I say, all the telephones started ringing, and Rongo says, well, we're going to definitely have to put you up in a motel and for 2 or 3 days while I go over and get him a vehicle and all that sort of stuff. So we said, yeah, okay. So we got invited onto the marae, and we're having our tea, and after we did the performance, we didn't just did a few songs and stuff. And anyhow, Rongo and myself were talking about it while we were having tea. And a couple of elders came over and sat beside us, and they said, "Hey, you guys are having trouble, eh?" And so anyhow, Rongo explained the trouble, and he says, you know, and the elders said, "Oh, that's not trouble. You can stay here." Big smile on their face, and Rongo kind of looks at me. He said, "Well, we'll have to have a meeting about it. We'll go out to the bus after the tea," and so away we went out to the thing after we having our tea, and we were talking about it, and and also the brother of Rongo was a bus driver. So anyhow, we were all talking about it, saying, "Well, should we stay in a motel or just go to this motel?" So when we, as we were talking, we said, "Well, what can really go wrong?" Said, your brother's a bus driver, and if something goes wrong, we'll just leave and go to a motel. So anyhow, that's what we went back and we told them, "Hey, we'll stay there." So anyhow, it was quite a neat stay, because they were part of the area where they had a big, like a mine, that they mined the sand and went through it for the iron, and then they shipped it overseas. But so the sand that on the beach, if it was sunny, it was really hard you had to run from puddle to puddle to keep your feet cool. But anyhow, after we were there the 3 days, Rongo and them came back, and before I left, they asked me to go around to back to the elders thing, and because we were having talking circles every night, so I was trying to figure out why that something might be wrong, but nothing ever happened. So anyhow, we went back to the elders' tent, and as we got there, they started explaining, "Hey, we're building those longhouses, and we got all the framework done, and what should we do? Like, half the community wants it here, the other half want it somewhere else." And I just looked at him and said, "Well, there's no way I can give you that answer." I said, "That's got to be from you people yourselves. You got to know that within your heart." And so I said, "The only thing that I do know," I said, "is you were telling me all the different things that had happened, like the fights and the wars and the gardens and all these sort of things, the cemeteries." And I said, "And also the other night when we were doing the talking circle, I looked out the door, and it was foggy, and they had a light out in the structure where they were going to build this longhouse, and so we could go to the washroom and stuff. Anyhow, it was foggy, and the light was shining through this framework, and it actually formed a cross shooting up into the air. And all I could go is, wow, so everybody looked, and I said, "That's got to be some kind of a sign." And they said, "Oh yeah, okay." So I just left it at that. Anyhow, when we walked out into the front to say our goodbyes, they had some chairs for us, and we were sitting on the chairs, and we gave them some gifts. Like I say, we had made these paddles for gifts and stuff, but it was an unplanned one. But I had some smaller stuff, like smaller mask and stuff like that I gave them. And anyhow, they thanked us, and then they brought out this different, like there's some pictures for the elders and stuff like that, and then they brought out this carving. And this carving, they started explaining it, and I got it just over here, so I'm going to go pick it up there and show you. Now this carving, if you look at it, it was all explained out, and the guy that explained it out was the guy that did the challenging, but he explained it all out about the different seeds and stuff like that on the top, and the 3 fingers, which is a thumb, but 3 fingers is always birth, life, death. These are seeds, and around at the one side was the male. And also these are like a sacred fern. And on the other side, excuse me, was a female, also with the fern. So from this whole thing, from the womb of this woman, these are all spirits. There's a little face and their arms, and it went around, and there's 12 of them all the way around. So it's kind of amazing, and they had feathers on it for each spirit. So it was guarding this lid. It's actually a lid. So as they were telling the story, getting all tangled up here, it also has like the guardian of the forest and the guardian of the ocean on the other side. It's different. No. As he finished telling that story, then he picked it up and he turned it upside down. And he said, and this is the unborn child. I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. And anyhow, he, after explaining it all, he said, well, the person that understands this, will they come and get it? So I just kind of sat there and kind of amazed at how things kind of related to the petroglyphs here. And anyhow, I was sitting there, and finally my wife, after talking to the elders, she gave me one of them little elbow things, and she said, you know what it means, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, sort of. I said, it's a lot similar to what the petroglyphs are. I said the 12 spirits around the outside also talks the same as back at the beginning there about how the shaman was talking about this time and how it was protecting, and it was a spirit of one. So it was all that same kind of story. So I really felt honored to have to go up and get this, and so anyhow, I kept it at home for a long time on the counter, and not realizing even then like how important this piece was. So one day, something came to me, and I thought, oh, I'll just bring it up here and see what happens, right? And so yeah, it's I put it in different places, picking it up and walking it around. Like I say, it's such a neat thing and such a neat story to it. So one of the places I put it was in the water, thinking that they're a long ways away, and why not have it in the water, because it brings the two together. So being by myself up here, you do different things, but I realized that it seemed to bring things together when we were even over there, because a lot of the stories they were telling actually related to kind of my thinking and how it all fit together with the rest of the carvings. So anyhow, I picked it up from here and I moved it up here, not thinking a whole lot about it. I was young back then. I didn't even need a cane. But I put it up here because I've always wondered what this was. And if you know about anything about the carvings, it's all sandstone. It's pure white. You scrub it, that's all it is. And after the archaeologists were here, that's the way it was. It was all pure white, because they were taking copies of it. So anyhow, I brought this here and I placed it there, and I left the lid off. And I thought, wow, that's, and just carried on doing things. It wasn't like I was trying to do anything supernatural or anything. Came back later and I picked it up and I put it upside down on this piece. This also has the baby on it. I thought, wow, okay. The one thing I did know before I went to New Zealand was looking at this whole carving. It was a bear, the shape of a bear. and the water flows across the nose of this big grizzly bear. The ears over there. The hump in the back kind of goes down this way. And this would be like the back end of the grizzly down here. And if you look at it, the bottom end, you'll see that there's granite there, the same as here. It's like a baby trying to be born, which is kind of a neat thing. It had one more toe on there, but somebody threw it away. So it was kind of relating that story to this. And that was probably a little over 7 months ago, 7 years ago. So I just left it like that. And it wasn't until I was going out one day and there was that piece that I showed you down by the rebirth of the sacred circle. There's that piece right beside it, which also is granite. And it looks like a baby being born. It's white all the way around it. So that was 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago. So then it was kind of like, well, obviously there's a tie-in here somewhere. And so anyhow, it's pretty well it, what I'm going to tell you for right now. I'm going to climb off this mountain here. I'll leave that where it's at. Another thing about this carving, also having the baby on the bottom, it also relates to this. Being the mother grizzly and the baby. And again, it's granite, it's not the sandstone. So here's it's kind of come out of the mother, and there's the toes. There's actually 2 toes, but there used to be one more here, so it's like 3 toes. It's like the baby trying to be born. Anyhow, Lawrence Pootless, I always remember when he ever spoke or anything, the first words came out of his mouth. Yeah. Yeah. First things that came out of his mouth was, our first people didn't migrate here. They came directly from the eyelashes of the sun to here. I thought, wow, that sounds neat. It's kind of poetic and it's also neat. But when I understand the carvings, I realized that the first people and the sun came down on the eyelashes of the sun. So I thought, wow, that's a pretty neat statement. I haven't heard that statement for quite a while, but that's kind of a neat way of saying where they came from. And they landed on different mountaintops with their different stories or smiosis. So with all that, I was looking at these carvings, and a lot of these are quite meaningful, because when I brought New Zealand people back, they were looking at this one and they actually had tears in their eyes. Because they said that's one of their spiritual people, like they were on the pole and stuff like that, their pole. They also have a totem that's up above, always on most of their mariahs. And so they always said, after listening to the stories that I had, and even back then they weren't as much as they are now, because stories are always like a never-ending story, I always say, because they're always growing. There are always new things added to it. It's always, I guess that's how the mind works. But it was kind of neat how it all fits together. We're going to go over to this one over here, the far one, and talk about how this one all fit together. And when I first saw this, when I first cleaned it out, it was really amazed at how the 4 directions is in there. It's very intricate. It's not like just a slapped together cross. It's true north, south, east, and west. I thought, wow, that's even super neat, because I had an engineer here that he put the compass on it. His name was Ken Davies, actually. Probably a lot of people remember him being here back then. So for a long time I was always looking at that. One day I was looking at it like I am right now, and I realized that you can see the sky, and the trees are going that way. So I thought, wow, that's even super neat. Because all of a sudden now we have 6 directions. So I thought, well, that's even more neater. And one day I was up here with a gentleman, and I was kind of explaining that, and he said, oh yeah, it's like the universe. So that makes everything. I thought, yeah, it does. But as I started paying attention to the whole thing, looking at it coming down here as a story, up on the top there's a egg being born. We're all being born. And you come down into this face here, and the body and the legs. It's all there. There's the legs, and the legs over there, the 2 hands. That's all. I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. And over time, I realized that by looking at the shaman down on the bridge there, I realized that we're all the spirit of one. And you can have the spirits up above, but always you have that one in the forehead, which is the spirit of one. And I don't care who you are, you all have that. We all have that spirit within us that has that same knowing. We all know what's good and what's wrong, and all these different things these new words that we put together now. Back then they didn't have that. So everything was a new learning. Back then everything was balanced. If something hurt you, you change it, you balance it. And so the spiritual people, they had their job to do, just like the fishermen, just like the people that looked after the gardens, got the food, helped gather, the ones that got the furs, the fish. Everybody had their job. And the shaman, being a spirit of one, actually was a way of saying, okay, we are the spirit, we'll look after that person, because whatever that is, that keeps that balance in tune. So that's what that all is. Yeah. So once I was saying, a shaman knows when things are out of balance, because everything's connected. So it helped that person or whatever that was out of balance and keep it in balance. So as we're born and we go through life, we know the difference. And like today, we might be told not to have a cookie, or not to have this, or not to have that, but we still do it. It's always that challenge. So when you understand all that and you start balancing yourself, you come down to this. And if you really look at it, you got the 6 directions, you got the universe. Then all of a sudden one day I was looking in it, and I realized the shadow of my head, the reflection of my head is right there. And as I was looking at it, I realized that this is the shape of an eye. So I thought, wow, that's cool, like an eye. But I also realized that that cross and that is your third eye. And by connecting them two, since I realized that, I always bring my kids and my grandkids up here, and we do that. We baptize our kids through that. So it's all to do with balance. Like I say, there's a lot of carvings on here that are to do with balance, and I kind of like that system. So it's a matter of everything that is, we're all part of. And also realize that the more we start paying attention to that, the kind of neater the way things are. Anyhow, I think I'll change positions here. I'm kind of leaving it alone because last year it was scratched really bad, so I'm trying to let it heal itself. And this one here is Skimina. First light of day, it's facing east. So we're always thankful for that east because that's a new day. And that's really important to all of us, is to look to the east and say thank you for that new day. And the more we do that, and the more we pay attention to living in now, that makes this Skimina, the Creator's daughter, very happy. So a lot of these coming around the outside with the way traffic has been over the years, as much as we tell people to stay off the carvings, you can stand there and tell them and they'll step right on it. So I'm just trying to say that we got to be more protective with this, and I guess I'm trying to say that everybody coming up that's from out of town and that should have a guide. Keep off this. This one here has been scratched at just right. You can tell somebody's digging at it with a stick. Well, if you want to wipe it off really clean, you can do that. The archaeologists did, but it ended up like that, pure white. So you can't see it. So again, it's the idea of this was to get these all filled with moss and stuff, and keep this white in between so it stands out. You can see it more like a picture. And I always think that even going to school, when the child does a picture story, why don't you just throw it on the floor and walk on it? I often wonder what that kid would say. I know my grandkids wouldn't think very much of it. So anyhow, again, these carvings are very old and they should be respected as such. I'm not trying to, but a lot of these stories here relate to this. And if you really look at them, a lot of the New Zealand stories come up this way, but also that rebirth stuff comes up this way as well. And so this one's like a bird. See that the beak, these two big eyes. And when I was in New Zealand, they told me about this moa bird. It was huge, but they also told me, this one guy touched the story and he said, I see this great big eagle. He said, what's that mean? I said, I don't know. Because I didn't. I didn't until later, you know, kind of through the time. But again, it's old. These big eagles and the moa bird are back prehistoric. So that part is all still here. And they're different faces. You know, like there's some with great big mouths. Like, look at that one. And there's another one here. It's not showing up unless it's wet. But there's an eye there and an eye there and then the mouth there. There's a line to it. It's a lot like this carving over in the water I'll show you in a bit. It's a balance thing. It's always about balance. So the more we can keep balance, the more happy we'll be. That sacred spot. So a lot of these, I have to, like, I don't know everything, and probably never will. I do spend a lot of time up here, like I say, but a lot of it's stuff like that. It's starting to get dirty, so I'm kind of hoping it'll show up once it's cleaned up a little bit. But like you had, see, even this one's pure white. So it doesn't show up unless you put water on it, and then it really stands out. So, yeah, even there's other things coming to life now, like on that broken piece there on the far end of it, there's a tiki doll. I believe the tiki doll, I might be wrong, it comes from Hawaii. And so why is that? So there's a lot of questions even in my mind, like why these things. Even though we went to Hawaii, going to New Zealand, a lot of people thought they would talk to Jeanette or some of the other people and they thought they were Hawaiian. So maybe there's relatives there as well. So I'm not going to speculate. So these carvings over at this side, if there ever was any on here, I don't think so because they're completely bare. I was also saying at the very first, that rebirth, the hand with the fingers, there's a number of them on this set of carvings here. There is none on the ones over here, but these here have quite a few hands, that rebirth. Now if you look right down here, I don't know if you can see it even, it's a newer one. And I keep thinking, well, maybe it's only about 2,000 years old or something. But see it? Right there? See, there's just a dot in there. So I often wonder, like, there was some destruction years ago by somebody hitting that with a hatchet and an arrow pointing up this way. So I often wonder, has that got something to do with some of the religions that come into that thing and trying to... You can see a lot of this, I think, is no, I don't even want to talk about that. This one over here, is very similar to that story over there, but we're born. Here's the egg, the baby inside. Starts off with an egg right there. So it's, then we're in here, we're born. So we live. We learn to live. This one's facing this way, the two eyes and the mouth. There's another one down here. There shouldn't be, there's two eyes and a mouth. So as we live and find our balance, we go through our life carrying on that way, and eventually we come to this. And if you see here, there's a happy face. There's a face right this way. It's happy, very happy. So there's an eye here and an eye there. So if you look at it, there's a crack right down through the middle. This side's black. I've tried even scrubbing on that. You can't get it to any change. This side stays white. You go, huh, what's the meaning of that? And if you stop and think about how a pantomime is, and what does a pantomime mean? It's got half black, half white. What does it mean? It means balance. Again, the same as what these carvings mean. It's balance, all about balance. And so it's, as we go through life, we balance ourselves. With this one here facing south and all the other carvings facing north, and like I say, going through the fire, the ice age, and the flood, residential, school, and smallpox, all these different things, This here represents, we made it through all that. We're still here. We're still standing. It's, yeah, it's been to me, it's always been a good life. I understand now that I'm getting a lot closer to the full circle of it. I mean, I'm up at 80 years old now, but I've lived half my life actually in Bella Coola. I'm like, wow, time is slowing it. And but like I say, the people that I've met and the people that I've been around, I've loved very much. I always told Jeanette right at first, I said, if I could do one thing to show you how much I really love you, I would see the people of Bella Coola being at peace and very loving, back the way the carvings say, a rebirth of that sacred circle, coming back to a time when things are back in tune. I don't believe that it's anything to do with me making that happen. It's a matter of the rebirth of the carvings, the coming back to a time when things once were in balance, that will make that happen. And that balance, I think, is a very important thing. Sometimes I look at it and go, wow, is that ever going to be possible? But I know spirit is very strong, and I'm very positive that it will happen. Whether I'm here in this body or not, I know I will be here, whether it be in this body or in the birth of a baby, but I know it will happen.